I would now like to introduce the speakers for today's seminar. We have two consultants for UNESCO-UNEVOC, Sarah Elson-Rogers and Graham Atherton. We also have three scientific officers from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission who all work on the digital economy. And we have with us today Anastasia Economou, Judith Cosgrove, and Cesar Herrera. I now hand over to Sarah Elson-Rogers, who I would like to mention started this project while working as a team leader at UNESCO-UNEVOC. Sarah continued working on this project as a consultant despite moving back to North America a few months ago. So thank you for that, Sarah, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Kenny, for opening today's webinar on behalf of UNEVOC. Yes, my name is Sarah Elson-Rogers, and as Kenny indicated, I was working until recently at UNEVOC. I have a new position, but for the time being, I also continue to oversee some of UNEVOC's work on the digital transformation of Tibet. So before we start, I will outline some housekeeping rules. If we could have the next slide, please, Aldrich. This webinar can be viewed with subtitles. So to access them, please click on the CC Live Transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please note the webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available through a link on the UNEVOC website after today's events. And thirdly, we hope you will have lots of questions to our presenters today, and we ask you to post them in the Q&A. You can also use the chat function. All participants, you will be muted throughout the webinar, so please do post your questions as they arise. I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A and the chat, and we'll be raising questions for the moderator to ask to today's presenters. Today's webinar will run for 90 minutes until 11:30, and as Kenny has indicated, we have three speakers from the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. All three speakers work in the Digital Economy Unit, and thank you again for joining us today to present your work. Our moderator is Professor Graham Atherton. Graham is the Director of the Centre of Inequality and Levelling Up at the University of West London, and is also a visiting professor at Sunway University in Malaysia. Graham leads the National Education Opportunities Network, known as NEON, and the World Access and Equity in Higher Education Network. And before I hand over to Graham, I will say a few words about UNEVOC's projects on the digital transformation of Tibet. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Aldrich. So as you can see, there are four projects presented in this slide. The first refers to a meta-study of data and trends in training teachers and trainers in digital skills. Additional pages are going to be added in the next few months to enrich the current data. But right now, the pages cover a pre- and post-COVID comparison of the importance and availability of relevant digital skills training for TVET teachers and trainers. And it also discusses their ability and the available data to access that training. The web pages also present some innovative practices from countries in Asia, Africa, and in Europe. For this year, we're going to dig a bit deeper into the topic and present some new case studies. So the second project on the slide is the repository of digital competence frameworks and how they are being used across the world. If you have a look at these web pages, you can see some articles comparing the different frameworks. For example, we have an article on the extent to which such frameworks can address the many digital divides that people face. We've added some new ones for 2023, and today's webinar presents two of the most well-developed frameworks used in the European Union, namely DigComp and DigComPedu. The third project on the slide is a database of toolkits targeted at Tibet providers to diagnose, assess, and/or compare their capacity and capability in a certain aspect of TVET provision. For example, the database contains toolkits to improve quality management, work-based learning, responding to climate change, and many other topics. The database has many different toolkits, including one, again, we are going to hear something about today, SELFIE, which is designed for teachers and their schools to assess their readiness for digitalisation, and its complementary toolkit, SELFIE for work-based learning. Last but not least, we have a small fourth project which presents a guide to open educational resources. Next slide, please, Aldrich. So today's webinar is the first in a series for 2023, which will include expert speakers on one or more aspect of these sub-projects. And as already mentioned, our three expert speakers today will start with Jude Cosgrove, who will present DigComp. We will have a 10-minute chance for questions and then move on to Anastasia Economou, who will present DigComPEdu, the digital competence framework for teachers and trainers, again with the opportunity to post your questions. And we will wrap up with Cesar Herrero, who will present the work being done on the digital transformation of TVET. So thanks again to the three of you for making the time to be with us today and to share your work. And now I will hand over to today's moderator, Graham. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome from London. So we do have a global representation, not in the audience only, but also amongst the speakers today. Sarah coming to us from America, colleagues from Germany and colleagues from Spain. And welcome you all, and thank you for spending your time to come and join this seminar today. I know we're all pressured in the work we have to do, but we're creating that space for dialogue today and sharing practice and knowledge. This is a crucial area, as I'm sure you'll agree. Digital transformation provides not only challenges to those in the vocational space, as we seek to support broader groups of learners to progress in their educational journeys. It also provides, of course, opportunities for new forms of connection, new forms of learning. What's exciting about today's seminar is the opportunity to hear about how that opportunity is being maximised by the work of EU DigComp. As Sarah said, we encourage you to try and post your questions in the chat. There is some time after each of the speakers for questions and also for discussion. So please, questions or even comments or thoughts to provoke that ongoing dialogue, which is so crucial for what UNEVOC are trying to do in this area. I'll hand over now. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. As I said there, please use Q&A for your questions. Don't be afraid to put a question in there, not just at the end of the presentations, but as the presentations are also ongoing. So on to our first speaker now. It's wonderful to welcome Jude Cosgrove. Jude is the Scientific Officer, the Digital Economy Unit, Joint Research Centre, the European Commission. Jude follows and oversees activities in relation to European Digital Competence Framework, DigComp. Previously working in Ireland in a number of roles, she was also at one time the Chief Executive of the Education Research Centre in Dublin. Strong advocate of collaboration, she's working on the theme of digital education and skills for the past 10 years. Has a keen interest in educational equity, as I do as well. So wonderful to welcome you, Jude, and I'll hand over to you.
Many thanks, Graham, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'd love to talk to you all morning about DigComp, but I'm going to try and keep to the time to 20 minutes. It's great to get a lovely introduction. I'll just mention very briefly about the JRC. It's the European Commission's I suppose, research and science for policy service. So the JRC as a whole provides scientific evidence for policy making for the European Commission. And as already been kindly introduced by Sarah, myself, Anastasia and Cesar work closely together in a team. So I'm going to now attempt to share my screen. Hopefully it'll work. So first test of digital competence. For me this morning. Is that working? No?
It says double close. I'm not seeing it yet.
No? Any joy? Sorry for this delay.
Not as
No?
yet, Jude.
Okay, let me try something else. How about now?
Ah, yes.
Here we are.
We have a
Thank you.
slide now, Jude.
Okay, great. So we've got the show on the road. Okay, I'm just going to drive the slideshow now. So very briefly, I'll give a little background context on DigComp, which is the European Digital Competence Framework for Citizens. I'll talk to you about the evolution of DigComp because the framework is around for about 10 years. I'll talk about some recent updates, and then the focus of the presentation will be on discussing resources that may be of interest to people listening into the webinar this morning. And I'll give a selection of just 3 examples of use. There are many, many examples there, but I've just picked 3 for this morning. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and discussion. Before I talk about DigComp, it could be interesting to think about, okay, well, what role does the European Commission play in the education and training system of member states? So as you probably know, there are different levels of involvement that the Commission has with member states, depending on the area we're talking about. In some cases, the Commission's right to act is conferred to it via treaties. And there's also the very important principle of subsidiarity, which means that the role of the European Commission is very much in harmony with the member states. Now, in the area of education and training, the European Commission, or sorry, the European Union may only support, coordinate or complement member states' actions and may not pass laws. So for that reason, the actions that the European Union takes are very much in what's called a supporting competences function. So as you can see, as we talk about the frameworks, the whole approach and philosophy is one of support and guidance rather than of anything that's very rigid or prescribed. The framework of DigComp has a history dating back to, well, before actually, but 2006 was the year in which a council recommendation was passed and updated, if you like, in 2018. And both of these recommendations promoted competence-oriented education, training and learning. And as you can see from the image there are 8 areas of competence which have been identified and agreed across the Union that are important for citizens and learners, among them digital. Now, to support countries to develop competences in citizens, reference frameworks have been developed. All of these have been developed through consultative, participatory and consensus-based processes. In terms of the DigComp framework, as I said earlier, the first version of it is 10 years old, which is, I suppose, quite remarkable that we're now 10 years looking at DigComp. It's now into its 4th version, DigComp 2.2, which was published last year. The other frameworks which the JRC has developed include EntreComp, which is a competence framework for entrepreneurship, LifeComp, which was published 2020 rather, which is life competences, and GreenComp as well, published in 2021. And as my colleagues Anastasia and Cesar will also show you, we also have DigComp.org, published in 2015, and that framework is designed to support competence for education organizations, and DigComPedu, which is supports competence development of educators. So moving specifically to DigComp, I mean, in a way, there's so much to say about digital and so many statistics that we could, I suppose, consider. But one of the key ones that always makes me think is there's a European Digital Decade Policy Programme, and it has an ambitious target of having 80% of citizens with at least basic digital skills by 2030. The current estimate of that is 54%. So there's a way to go. And DigComp is designed to help support those efforts. The definition of digital competence, I've shown it here on the screen. It comes from the 2018 Council recommendation, and it's probably worth considering just for a moment. It involves the confident, critical and responsible use of and engagement with digital technologies for learning at work, and for participation in society. The interesting thing here is that competence in this framework and in all competence frameworks of the JRC incorporates knowledge, skills and attitudes, which is maybe a little different to the skills focus that we sometimes see in employment contexts. Now, the framework is very broad because it's for citizens, and it's very flexible with respect to how it could be used, implemented, and with respect to how it may be developed into the future. And indeed, as you can see, there already have been 4 iterations of the framework over the last decade, reflecting the speed of digital transformation, the changing nature of digital competence, and the need to keep the framework up to date. DigComp is attempting to promote common language, terminology, and understanding of what we mean by digital competence. It guides policy and strategy development, implementation, and monitoring. It also guides curriculum development and also the development of education and training content. It aids with the development of digital competence assessment. So that's both the objective psychometric assessments and self-assessment. And it's also being used in digital skills certification tools. And for those kinds of reasons, it supports alignment in competence measurement. So very briefly now, the dimensions of the DigComp framework, there are 5 dimensions. The first 2, competence areas and competence, focuses on the content. What are we talking about? So there are 5 competence areas and 21 competences. So each of the competence areas has subparts in it called competences, and I'll show you those in a moment. There are also in dimension 3 proficiency levels, and those describe to what degree, to what standard, or to what level can somebody perform a digital task, or to what degree of complexity do they understand a certain element of digital competence. Dimension 4 gives concrete examples of the competences, covering knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And finally, in the framework, there are examples of application of these various competences in work and education contexts. So the first 2 dimensions are shown here. I mean, every time I look at this framework, I'm always, struck by how broad it is. It covers these 5 broad areas: information and data literacy, communication, collaboration, digital content creation, safety, which also incorporates well-being, and problem solving. And then on the right there, you can see the 5 competence areas mapped to the 21 competences. So for example, for information and data literacy, we can see that there are 3 more specific competences. Dimension 3 then describes proficiency levels, and we can describe proficiency levels in 4 levels, ranging from foundation, intermediate, advanced through to highly specialized, or the more granular levels. And proficiency is described in terms of task complexity, the level of autonomy with which a person can perform the task, and also the type of cognitive processing involved, ranging from recall to critical evaluation and then through to creating. I'll talk now very briefly on what the DigComp 2.2 update published last year consists of in a nutshell. So the main update was the addition of these 259, I think it is, examples of knowledge, skills, and attitudes to the framework. Now, those attitudes bring in more recent developments in digital competence, such as the importance of fact-checking online content, competences required for remote or hybrid working and indeed learning contexts, digital accessibility consideration, green and sustainability aspects of interacting with digital technologies, well-being and safety, and also very importantly now with the very recent and both inspiring and maybe concerning developments in generative AI, a consideration of citizens interacting with AI systems and data literacy. I might just note here as well that DigComp, again, it's a framework for citizens, so it doesn't explicitly cover ICT specialist skills. However, there is a European e-competence framework which does cover these more specialist skills. So I've just put a reference to that framework there. A little look in now at Dimension 4. I'd encourage anybody who's interested to browse the framework document, and I've put links at the end of this presentation in case you want to find out more. So in the publication, the DigComp 2 publication, you can see on the left-hand side there, we've got, okay, this is Dimension 1, information and data literacy. And the examples to the right of the screen are examples of browsing, searching and filtering data, information and digital content. So I could just put one example of knowledge, skill and attitude up on this screen so you can just get an idea of how the new element of the framework looks. Although, as I said before, there are 259 examples. So there's a lot of information to browse through. And these examples are being used in various ways in various countries. For example, to develop curriculum, to use as inspiration for assessment, learning content, learning outcomes development, and so on. Now on to implementation examples. There are a number of publications on, there's a dedicated web space for DigComp. The link is at the end of this presentation, and there are 3 publications on that web space which could be of interest. Firstly, DigComp into Action describes about 40 inspiring examples of DigComp implementation, and these are illustrated by various case studies and tools. There's also a DigComp at Work publication, which focuses on employability and employment contexts, and it does an in-depth analysis of 9 inspiring practices. And the DigComp at Work implementation guide is a companion to the DigComp at Work and consists of examples, guidelines, tips and resources which were gathered through learning and listening to member states' experiences in using DigComp in these ways. And finally, there's the Digital Skills and Jobs platform includes a repository of good practice examples, and it's searchable. So if you're looking for something in, let's say, a vet context, using DigComp or for digital skills development or whatever it may be, you can actually search this web space and see inspiring examples and resources for this. This is quite a nice resource as well. Use case example 1, as I said, I had real trouble picking just 3 examples for this morning because there are so many inspiring examples. And again, many of them available through the Digital Skills and Jobs platform that I referenced a moment ago. Firstly, Fit for Internet in Austria is an organization which has developed DigComp Austria, it's called, which is very closely based to DigComp, but with some adaptations. So just as an example, the DigComp Austria version has added a 6th competence area, which is foundations, access and digital understanding, which is almost like a baseline measure of like entry digital competences. And there are other adaptations to the framework as well. From this framework, they have developed a self-assessment tool, which is based on self-reflection items and also knowledge-based items. And from here, a user can go in and access a training catalog with various training modules and options which are mapped to DigComp. So this is a really nice example of DigComp implementation, and I've put the links there if you want to find out more information on the framework itself, which is available in English, I believe. the assessment and also the course offerings. Second example focuses on digital competence development of women and girls, which is of key concern. One of the digital decade targets is to achieve gender parity in female participation in education, ICT related education and ICT related careers. At the moment, there are only about 20% of women in ICT related fields. So I've chosen an example focusing on women for this reason. Women for IT is an international partnership project. The piece of this work that I think could be interest to this group is the open educational resources that the project has developed. There's a big number of these resources available, and they are searchable according to the language they're available, the type of job that they would suit. So their job profiling is part of this work, and they're also searchable by competence areas of the DigComp framework. The purpose of the Women for IT project was to increase the number of vulnerable or excluded girls and young women into the digital agenda, and it's been very impactful. I've put some outcome indicators of the project up on the top right, but as I said, it's possible that the open education resource material may be of interest as an inspiration to this group, or indeed any other element of the project could be of interest. Third use case example comes from Denmark. And the project is called the Digital Competence Wheel. I really like the visual representation of digital competence in this project. Again, a bit like the Austrian example, it's been inspired by DigComp, but is not rigidly based on DigComp. So this is again demonstrates the flexibility with which DigComp can be applied, implemented, and so on. The purpose of the Digital Competence Wheel project is to provide a self-assessed overview of digital competence, and then from the profile matched to training offer is given through this project. So as again, I've put the web link there for anybody who's interested in finding out more. The list of resources I've put here in the presentation, and I also would like to mention there's a community of practice for DigComp, which is hosted by our colleagues at All Digital. And this is quite a vibrant community of practice. It has a little over 800 members from both European countries and non-European countries. I had a look recently, and there are members in this COP, or online community of practice, from Africa, Asia, South America, North America. So it's quite an international community, and it's free for all to join. And finally, that's me finished. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Jude, for that excellent presentation, and it really gave us a flavour there of the scope and range of DigComp, and particularly also how the platform's a very live one, very much moving forward, and I think that's very interesting as well. Let's see now if there is any time for questions or Q&A in the chat there. If you do have your questions, please place them in the Q&A or indeed the chat. So we have a couple of questions here. The first question is, how frequently is DigComp updated, and what triggers an update? Jude.
This is a very good question. As you can see, the update timing so far hasn't been even, and we need to get a very good balance between when we update and the various stages of implementation of countries, because as you can imagine, if we've got a country implementing a big project for curriculum reform, and they're developing maybe online education and training content and assessment, it could take them 2 years or more to achieve this. So if we make a big update to DigComp and then push that into the system, it really introduces an unwelcome disruption. So it's a tricky balancing act, and really the updates would not be any more frequent than every 3 to 4 years. But so far, there is no, as I say, fixed timeline for updating. We're very much listening to what countries are, paying attention to what countries are doing, listening to their needs, and also following national policies and international policies, international policy development, not just in the EU, but more globally, to see what and when we may update, and how it's also how best to update, so that we allow countries which are using DigComp in various ways to maintain stability and build. So an example of a recent development is on April the 18th, the European Commission published 2 Council recommendations in the area of digital education and skills. And those are now being considered by member states and will be hopefully adopted by the end of the year. Now, the implications of those recommendations for the update of DigComp are there. It includes a recommendation, for example, to look at and perhaps adopt a European Digital Skills Certificate. So this gives rise to, okay, what may we need to look at in terms of DigComp to support this work? And we think at the moment, current priority for future development should be the specification of learning outcomes. Maybe we can provide more guidance and support at a European level for countries to do that. And then, of course, we know that there are a lot of concerns about generative AI, misinformation, disinformation. So there's no, I suppose, short or easy answer to your question, or to the question posed.
Sure.
But the strategy would be to build on what is there and provide tools and additional resources to allow countries to keep up to date in their own work and also align, if that makes sense. Thanks.
No, I suppose consultation and engagement with your stakeholders and your partners is crucial then, isn't it, Jude, to ensure that you strike this balance between moving the platform forward, but also being aware of where they are in terms of implementation. So you spoke before about that engagement and consultation piece. It sounds really important to DigComp, I would suggest.
It absolutely, it is, if you like, the bread and butter of the framework. It's what builds it. It's, or not even the bread and butter, the foundations of it. For the update of DigComp 2.2, I mean, I'm actually took over the DigComp file from a predecessor who worked on the file for 9 years. And when I first looked at the DigComp 2 framework document, I was absolutely amazed at the amount of people who were acknowledged in it. And it just shows how many people were consulted, how many people contributed. And the DigComp hub that I referenced was a key resource. It wasn't the only resource used in the stakeholder consultation, but it was a key resource, and it's something we really regard as important, the work of the JRC, this consultation. So I would say that we were planning some form of consultation beginning from next year to slowly lead us into where we may go next with the DigComp framework.
Another question we have here, following up on one of the things you mentioned in your answer there, Jude, is the issue of AI. Obviously, it's on everybody's lips at the moment, across society and across education as well. So what's the situation with DigComp there? Where does AI sit with DigComp? Is this a new opportunity for DigComp? Is it something that isn't really going to impact so much on the way the framework's going? What does it feel like at the moment for you, Jude, in the AI context?
I'm glad you didn't ask me what I thought of AI, rather than, I'm glad you asked.
Keep on the framework.
Yeah, in terms of AI, the positioning of AI within the DigComp framework is transversal, which may sound counterintuitive, but actually, when we think about it, elements of AI impact on competences related to interpretation of information, generation of information, safety, problem solving. It impacts across all of the elements of the framework. So that's how it sits in the framework at the moment. And strategically, if we consider, okay, how do we respond to AI in a structured way? It's helpful to consider the framework as modular. So if the concern, or a concern rather, is to equip citizens with the competences to, I suppose, cope with AI, and rather than fear it, to really use it, and also be aware of how it's being used, we might see developments maybe at European level, maybe at national level, in terms of education and training modules focused on these particular concerns, which still sit within the framework of DigComp, if that makes sense. So there may be, there's a transversal implication. I suppose what I'm saying is there's an implication of AI that transverses all of the framework, but in terms of responding to it in a constructive way, we can develop education and training modules that are focused on the specific and add these into the mix rather than reinventing the wheel and breaking open the framework and restructuring it entirely, because that kind of activity wouldn't be wise given the history of DigComp.
No, I think the history is very important as well. I mean, I think this is something that hasn't evolved over 2 or 3 years, but as you pointed out, began really in 2006. That history is really important. We have a couple more questions now. The first question is from a member of the audience. In the VET context, the vocational context, to what extent does the framework support the development of hands-on skill to improve a learner's employability? Any thoughts on that, Jude?
You know, I was having a chat with a colleague in SEDIFOP yesterday, and we think that there is a little bit of an evidence gap in terms of VET and digital skills, at least in Europe, although the work that Cesar is doing and will present on shortly does help to fill that gap. So at a European level, it's difficult to give a complete European picture, sure, although we know from recent structured dialogue with member states conducted by the Commission on the topic of digital education and skills, that the focus of the use of DigComp, if you like, in VET context is very much looking at linking it to work-based learning. So as I said, I can't think of any concrete examples off the top of my head, sure, but Cesar will explore that topic in a little more depth shortly.
Exactly. And leads us nicely on, I think, to some of our later topics. It's about time to squeeze one more question in from Alu in Liberia. So Alu says, as a member of the national technical team that developed the national strategy, the digital transformation of TVET and skills development, what advice or lessons can we learn from DigComp as we begin the process of transforming digital skills in a country of numerous challenges ranging from capacity to equipment? So a good question, because I think what we do, I'm sure you can relate it to you, that DigComp's not just been used in Europe anyway, it's had their implications and had use across the world. So do you have any final points for Alu to take on in his work in Liberia?
Well, first of all, the very best wishes and luck to Alu in Liberia in developing this important work. Yeah, I sympathize, because it's difficult just starting out in something where the field is so complex and the problems are probably significant by the sounds of it. And also the thing is, with this area, they are replete with interdependencies as well. So this is not my lessons learned, but from listening to other countries and on how they go about things, consultation, collaboration, really, I think getting the key people around the table who will have an important role in decision making from the beginning is so important. That's one thing we discovered from the structured dialogues, to have people talking that don't normally talk, to have people talking about infrastructure, working on infrastructure, talking to people who deliver training. These kinds of new formations of groups is key. In terms of how DigComp can help, DigComp can provide a starting structure in terms of what's our vision, what are our goals, and gradually allow the discussion to fill in the gaps in what's there. But I wish the colleague all the best with the work, and please feel free to contact us if you have any questions in terms of how to learn from others, or if we can help. I'd also suggest to join the community of practice, which may have some colleagues there that would be keen to exchange on that.
Thank you, Jill. Excellent advice there. Hopefully that's useful for Alu taking their work forward in Liberia. I think we're probably at the end of our Q&A session now, I'm afraid. And as you said at the beginning, Jude, you probably could carry on for a long time with this area I was just talking about it in presentation terms, we're discussing it as well. But we're going to move on to our next speaker now and turn our focus a little more closely onto education. So before we finish, I'd like to thank Jude. If you're out there in your own areas, I know normally we were together, you thank her in a conventional way by applauding, but I'm sure you're doing that in your own context anyway. You've got applaud sign there, some of you have on Zoom. Okay, so on to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is also from the same team as Jude. Wonderful to welcome Anastasia Economou, who works at Joint Research Centre, the European Commission since February 2020. She's leading on SELFIE for Teachers, self-reflection tool based on a European framework for the digital competence of educators. In a previous position, she was head of the Educational Technology Department at the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute. So Anastasia, it's your turn. Over to you.
Many thanks, Graham. Many thanks for the introduction and, of course, the invitation here. I think it's very important for us to share our work and build more on that based on feedback and input that we receive. So following Jude's presentation, I will focus more on the digital competence for educators. So let me share my screen as well to facilitate the presentation. So let's see if we can make it. So let me know if you can already see my screen.
Yes, Anastasia, we can see
Yes.
your screen now.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So the digital competence for educators, the framework, actually aims to help and support education systems, but mainly educators, to further develop their digital competence. And as you will see, in the new European Commission Digital Education Action Plan 2021-2027, digital competence for educators is considered to be a core skill for all educators and training staff. And it's considered to be embedded in all areas of teacher professional development. So we see that the Commission acknowledges the role of educators in the whole learning process and the changes that we expect in a digital transformation of education. So back in 2017, the response of the European Commission on what Jude presented already for digital competence to be one of the 8 key competences, life competences. It was to develop a European framework that aimed to be a conceptual framework describing what digital competence is for educators. It aimed to provide a common reference for all education stakeholders in order to initiate discussions and approach ways, programs, strategies, policies to support the building of educators' digital competence. The framework covers all education levels from early childhood to adult learning, and it was developed through an iterative process of consultations with experts, member state representatives, scientific background. So as we see, the framework has a very wide acceptance, not only in the European Union, but also internationally. Jude already referred to how we approach digital competence based on the Council recommendation of key competence for lifelong learning. And I wanted to stress here that, as Jude said, competence, it combines knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and not only the technological skills that usually we expect to see from people using devices or applications. So the digital competence framework for citizens is a starting point. And we expect that all educators as citizens, they are aware of their digital competence and based on that. However, we've seen the need to extend to specific competence for educators. we see that educators are not only they don't need only to develop their competence for their own personal or professional development, but also to facilitate their learners' competences. So the approach of the DigComEdu framework is to have 3 pillars addressing the specific educators' competences. The first pillar is educators' professional competences, and that is based on their professional context, on their professional engagement. The second pillar, it has to do with pedagogical competences. So how educators are using digital technologies to facilitate learning, empower learners, and achieve the best possible learning outcomes for their students. And finally, the third pillar is about learners' competences and how educators facilitate the digital competence of their learners as the future citizens. And this pillar is reflecting also the digital competence framework for citizens. So for each one of these pillars, 6 areas are identified in total. So we see that area 1 has to do with competences related to professional engagement. In pillar 2, we have 4 areas, which is the core actually pillar of the digital competence for educators, which is referring to digital resources, teaching and learning, assessment, and empowering learners. And finally, the 6th area, which is facilitating learners' digital competence. The framework, apart from the 6 areas, analyzes the competences underneath each area. So in total, in the framework, we describe 22 competences, key competences, under each one of the 6 areas and the 3 pillars, as I explained. And for each one of these competences, there is a description and some examples of what the team who developed the framework envision this. So, for example, you will see under professional engagement, we have the organizational communication competence, the professional collaboration, the reflective practice, and digital professional development. And you will see that a lot of these competences are interrelated. As for example, in area 2, where we refer to digital resources, selecting, creating, and modifying, managing, protecting, sharing. It also connects to the professional collaboration of how teachers are collaborating within their professional context in order to create, for example, digital resources in their own, for example, school or university or training institution. So you will see here the 22 competences, and as I said, for each one there is a description reflecting what each one of these competences encompasses. So, for example, in area 1, which is the professional engagement, you will see professional collaboration that describes this competence as the use of digital technologies to engage in collaboration with other educators, sharing and exchanging knowledge and experience, and collaboratively innovating pedagogic practices. And for each one of the 22 competences, there are this kind of descriptors. The framework also describes a progression model. So in digital competence for educators, it can start from A1, which is awareness, up to C2, which is innovation. So each educator can develop digital competence in a progression, which is not a certain point on its own, but it's like a line through which the teacher or any educator would progress through their career. And in the framework, you will see, for example, for each one of the areas, the 6 areas, how each one of the levels is described. So if we take an example of B1, which is an integrator as a proficiency level in teaching and learning, it means that this educator can meaningfully integrate digital technologies in teaching and learning. And even more, for each one of these progression proficiency levels, there are some statements, as we could say examples, so that we understand what this means. So we referred to before to B1, and I'm sorry, it was integrator B1, and you will see integrating available digital technologies meaningfully into the teaching process. And what does that mean? That the educator can organize and manage the integration of digital devices into the teaching and learning process, but also manage the integration of digital content into the teaching and learning process. So this was the work that has been done with the JRC scientific team, and of course all the experts, as I said, that collaborate with this. In the progress of time, we realized that teachers and educators in general needed something more concrete and more guidance into be able to follow in order to develop their digital competence through a learning process. So especially after COVID, we have seen that not all education systems and not all educators were ready to pick up the need of remote teaching and learning, and of course using digital technologies to enable such teaching and learning during the COVID time. So what we tried to do was to take the framework and bring it into a closer stage to the teachers. So we developed a self-reflection tool called SELFIE for Teachers, which aims to school education teachers. And realizing that self-reflection is a learning process that allows teachers as adult learners as well to actively engage into their learning process, and also empower their own agency into their professional development. And knowing as well from research, especially Italy's, that teachers might attend digital competence professional activities, but not necessarily feel competent and confident into using digital technology. So we follow the self-reflection process as a professional learning approach to support and guide teachers through a self-reflection in order to identify with guided items to guide them to identify their strengths and gaps in terms of their digital competence. The tool has been piloted in 5 countries, so to confirm the viability and reliability of the tool in order to make sure that we are measuring what we are measuring, and we are facilitating the teachers to reflect into digital competence that is relevant to them. So you will see here in the process of adapting the framework into a self-reflection tool, which is more practical approach of using the framework, we see that we ended up with 32 items reflecting the 22 competences of the framework. And this is because we know that with current and emerging trends, we needed to bring forward some of the competences that were necessary for the teachers. So you will see, for example, that we have emerging technologies, including AI, included in one of the 32 items. Or you will see the blended learning item, or you will see the computational thinking item. So these 32 items, they reflect the 22 competences, but they bring forward as well the new needs, the new trends, and the current emerging trends that we have today. We follow the proficiency levels of the framework from A1 to C2, as we've seen in the progression model, trying to support teachers into their self-reflection with action verbs. These action verbs, they guide teachers to think from the individual to the more collective. So I am aware, but I also initiate, contribute to the school or community, but also from the more specific to the more strategic. So you will see that we start from the newcomer, I am aware, the explorer, I have tried, integrator, I use, expert, and I analyze, reflect, and redesign. A leader, I support others as well, but also involve students, and pioneer, initiate, contribute to the school or community. So following the guided self-reflection with the 32 items, the teachers, as I said, position themselves into the proficiency level statement, and the tool automatically generates a report with results based on each one of the items, but also in the areas and the overall competence, and also providing qualitative results with suggestions how to level up. So based on this report, we expect that the teachers will take advantage of the results of the self-reflection, analyze their individual feedback report, which they only see themselves, nobody else can see it, plan and design their own professional learning path. So we see them also as learning designers. I mean, they're the professionals for learning design. So they are the best ones for themselves as well to identify their needs and develop their own professional learning paths. And of course, follow with the support of their professional context, training courses, join communities of practice, work with colleagues, and develop their new their competence even further. And finally, they can retake the self-reflection and see if there was any progress and during this learning process that they followed. We are now developing early childhood and care education version for SELFIE for teachers, which we received a lot of interest from this group of professionals. And we also have for higher education that we use a different platform, and slowly we think that we might be able to also bring it into the platform of SELFIE for teachers. And for vet education, we don't have anything yet, but you will see some examples of projects that it seems that there's also a need there to follow. Let me also provide in the last couple of minutes some examples of how we see the framework being used, but also SELFIE for teachers. As I said, the framework is a conceptual framework that aims to provide a common reference and also the base of discussions to, for example, create, as we've seen, self-assessment tools or self-reflection tools, or even assessment tools or certification, national strategies and policies. So we will see a few examples here. With the most recent one at the national level, the Spanish example, where the Federal Ministry of Education used the DigComPedu, but also SELFIE for teachers to create their own reference for teachers in Spain. So you will see how they managed to bring together the two, which, as I said, competitors are the same, but with the new current trends, how they incorporate this into the transversal framework that they propose for the national context. Another example is at regional level, and I think the Flemish example is a good one to mention, how they used, again, the DigComPedu in order to create and adapt SELFIE for teachers into their own context. So they have the questionnaire of SELFIE for teachers, but they also combined it with suggestions that are contextualized in the Flemish education system. And even further, they proceeded and they connected to the suggestions links to specific training activities. So they have resources and training database where the teachers, they can follow the individual learning routes, but also already with specific resources contextualized in the Flemish situation. Another example that I wanted to share that is more relevant for VET is the Swiss example. It was a project funded by the Swiss Federation, and how they use the DigComEdu framework in order to create their own new questionnaire that was again based on the needs that they identified in the specific target group of VET educators, VET teachers in the region of Switzerland. So giving these examples, I think that you will also find some very important information about what we're doing through the websites that we have. So of course the framework, it's available since 2017. Now we have another website where you can find information about SELFIE for teachers, and we also host a community temporarily linked in as we had to change from the previous one, but I think there you can also find and connect with other educators of how they are using the framework and also the tool. We have published recently the report for SELFIE for teachers, but also a toolkit for teachers on how to use the tool. And I think I will stop here, and I'm open to any questions and discussion that you might have.
Thank you, Anastasia. Another excellent presentation there, and very interesting to hear, as with Jude's presentation, how the framework is being implemented in different contexts, particularly the Swiss example there, as they've really adapted the framework to meet the needs in Switzerland. And also interesting to hear how you're planning to develop the framework for those working in education, and also for those working in early years as well. So we have quite a few questions actually, Anastasia, for you in Q&A, so we'll go straight to those questions, try and cover as many as we can in the 10 minutes we have available. The first question is a question about school level. Have you learned anything about the effective implementation of the framework at level of the school? What happens there? How does one best implement the framework at that individual school level? Is there anything you found from that in your work?
Mm-hmm. As I said, the framework is a conceptual framework, so it's not used directly to identify the levels of teachers. So that is for the SELFIE for teachers tool, that we can see how at the personal case the proficiency level is applied. So we collected the data now from the first year of the SELFIE for teachers use, and we have seen how teachers identify the proficiency level and how they can proceed even further to the next level. I can share maybe informally now some of the first results that we see that most of the teachers, they feel from the self-reflection that they are in level B1 in most of the areas. And what does that mean? That they started integrating digital technologies into their teaching and learning practices. And this is, of course, normal, because after the COVID, they were somehow forced into using digital technologies. And now we see that in B2, which is the next step, how to integrate these technologies critically and with the aim of the best learning outcomes for the students, we need to focus and develop more training resources and material for that. In terms of the framework, how these proficiency levels are being used, I think that some ideas that we hear from stakeholders is that the framework can give them a compass or a basis of how to develop even some certification of teachers. So depending on the national context or regional context and what the region or country expects from their teachers, they can follow this progression level and decide what they would expect for the teachers' profile related to their digital competence.
Thank you, Anastasia. A slightly different, but perhaps related question. We'll have to see how we answer this one. It goes from Magda here. What Magda's found in piloting SELFIE in vocational institutions, the results from the teachers were a little distorted. Institutions, teachers and students evaluated their competencies as way higher than reality. There's a tendency perhaps when filling these tools in, there's a tendency, even when one knows the tool or the results won't be seen by anybody else, to perhaps inflate one's own abilities. How can we ensure that data is reliable and valid? What can we do about this issue? Are there other tools we can use to ensure that assessment is more valid? What's your view on that? Is that something that you found in other contexts as well, Anastasia? How do we deal with this issue?
That's a very good point for discussion, and it's very important to stress that the data we have is self-reflection data, and of course, self-reflection data is very subjective. And the aim of the tool is not to provide data to assess teachers. The aim of the tool is to provide data in order to support the teacher, individual teacher, to further develop. So, I mean, self-reflection, it can be very easy to be done, you know, just answer without thorough thinking. But teachers, because they are looking at their professional development, and that's what we're trying to empower them to do, they spend time and they have to be honest to themselves in order to benefit of this self-reflection process. So what we say is that the self-reflection data, if we want to see the aggregated data, like for what I said before, that we see from the self-reflection of the teachers, the position of themselves into B1, we have to always take into consideration that this is not objective data and cannot be used, you know, as assessment data. So it can only support the discussion of how we see digital competence for teachers. But if I have time, I would like to make a comment here. In the analysis of the data that we do, we have in the tool, we are asking the teachers how they perceive themselves before they go through this guided self-reflection based on the DigComPedu framework. So they position themselves in the 6 levels. Then they go through the guided self-reflection. We have the final idea of what they think that the proficiency level is, and then we ask them again, what do they think? And we're going to publish this soon. So you will see, for example, that the newcomers in the lower proficiency levels, they always judge themselves, they perceive themselves as lower proficiency level than they think they have. But when they go through the guided self-reflection, they are a bit higher. So this guided self-reflection makes them aware of what digital competence is actually for a teacher. On the contrary, the ones that they perceive themselves more competent, after they go through the self-reflection and they understand even in more depth what digital competence is, they finally are a bit lower. So we're trying to analyze even more this and see how we can come with some points for discussion to facilitate the support of the professional development of teachers.
Thank you, Anastasia. Very interesting points. I mean, I think what we're seeing there is perhaps in different regional, national, cultural contexts, the perception that teachers have of their own abilities is rather different. We're only a little bit out of time now. There's one final question, perhaps that I'm going to take offline. It's actually from Yasmin, who's using the tool in international schools in Egypt, but the problem is one of translation. There's not a problem with the translation, but I think it's they need the key to create something similar to an automated electronic version. So maybe that's something they could contact you offline and see if there's any way you can help them there, because they're very keen, I think, to use the tool as many contexts as possible. Unfortunately, no. I mean, maybe if Yasmin perhaps could contact Anastasia directly, and maybe that'd be a way of taking that forward. I think in a moment now we're going to have to move on, I'm afraid, Anastasia. I mean, I'm sure we could again carry on for a longer time, but we're going to move on to Cesar, our final speaker. So I'd like to thank you, Anastasia, for your wonderful presentation. And I'm sure the audience around the world are thanking you.
Contact me for any other questions, but I will try to respond to those in the chat anyways. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anastasia. I'm sure around the world people will be thanking you in their conventional manner. So we go on to our final speaker. We move ourselves closely on now, I think, on our final presentation to the vocational and work-based learning arena. And our final speaker is Cesar Herrero, who's a scientific researcher at the European Commission of the Joint Research Centre in Seville. He contributes to research and policy support in the field of human capital and employment. His work also focuses on schools' digital capacity and readiness, and also has taken other work on research, particularly looking at inclusion of migrants and refugees as well there. So again, that inclusion element really important. Cesar, I only have 5 minutes. I'm not going to eat into it, so straight over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity and informing the audience. It's my pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm very happy to share with you the work that we are.
Cesar, we can hardly hear you.
Yes.
Can we work on the sound before we start?
Hear me or?
This sounded better.
Yes, this is better.
Okay, sorry. I was saying that very happy to be here with you all today and to briefly present the work, the research we are doing in terms of digital transformation of the sector. I'm going to share the presentation. Hopefully it is going to work. And let me see full presentation mode. Hopefully
yes, we can see it now, Cesar. It's good.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned before, I'm going to present the work we are doing in terms of digital transformation of the sector. As we all know, society is facing many challenges today, from climate change to energy to medical crisis like the COVID-19. And we need to be as well prepared as possible for this unexpected situation. And one of these challenges is digital transformation. As we all know, digital technologies are affecting all areas of our life, from the way we learn, we interact, we communicate, we buy, we work. So we need to take into account this, and many member states and countries around the world are aware of that, and they are taking efforts in this regard. So apart from this general feeling that digital technologies are here and they are affecting everything, there are some evidences from research, such as this indicator, DESI, which is the Digital Economy and Society Index, which says that almost half of the European citizens lack what we consider basic digital skills. But at the same time, around 85% of future jobs and present jobs would require this basic level of digital skills. So as you can imagine, there is a gap here, and we need to address that. But at the moment, also, this lack of basic digital skills is one of the major obstacles for companies for investment. So we need to do something, and the two main ways to do so is through the educational system, formal education, but also via upskilling and reskilling. So in the European Commission, we are aware of that, and that's why we have been working a lot in educational resources, but also in other resources, such as the framework presented by youth, which is a more general framework for citizens. And in relation to education, we have these two main frameworks. The one presented by Anastasia, which is focused on individuals, on teachers, and the one focused on educational institutions, which is called DigComp, it's the European framework for digitally competent educational organization. This framework provides a reference, a common language for all the people interested in the topic, and it provides a reference for the educational institution in order to be digitally competent for what they need, what they need to do, what they need to have. So it's a reference for schools and for people interested in the topic. But that was the first step. It was launched in 2015, but this is a more theoretical resource, and we felt that something more practical was needed for schools. That's why we created the tools. First, SELFIE for general education. It covers primary, secondary, and these general educational levels. And then we generated a new extension, which is called SELFIE for work-based learning. This is more focused on vocational education and training, and also in work-based learning environments. It's very important to mention that all these frameworks, all these tools are fully based on research. They are developed based on evidences, to different methodological approaches with the consultation of different experts. So the frameworks and the tools are fully solid and are fully reliable. It's very important to mention that. So if we go directly to the topic, I'm going to focus on one of the major actions that we do here in JRC to support the digital transformation of the vet sector, which is this tool. It's SELFIE for work-based learning. Here is available the links and also some fact sheets with the more relevant information from the piloting, from the development of the proper tool, which are fully available at the website. It's also important to mention that the tool is available in around 40 languages, it's for free, and it's quite easy to use. And that's a very important point. If you access to the website, you can find many resources and guidelines and resources to be used at the school level. So the important point, why? Why do we need to create this tool? As we all know, VET is very high, not only in the European agenda, but that's our scope. So that's what I'm going to say. It's high in the European agenda, and there is a clear effort and interesting and important effort to support the development of the VET system with a clear focus on the digital part. Because as I mentioned before, we are facing a digital transformation, and we need to make that this digital transformation works for everybody. We cannot leave anybody behind. So it was a very important. It has been a very important effort to support this digital transformation of the sector, and this tool is designed for that purpose. In addition to that, we reflected and based on different discussion and different exploratory study that companies were not very well involved in this process, and that's why with this extension, with SELFIE work-based learning, one of the major novelties is that we bring companies on board. But these are only no words from me, not only a statement that I think or I am in favor of. We did a feasibility study to analyze if there were a clear need to this tool, and also if it was technically possible to achieve that with positive results. So we were involved in the process of developing the tool. So what's that? What's SELFIE for work-based learning? This is a self-reflection tool. So as Anastasia mentioned, it's a tool that collects feedback, information, feelings, reflection from the school community. In this case, we involve school leaders, in this case, VET school leaders, VET teachers, VET learners, and also in company trainers. The company trainers are the people who plays a role in the company, which is supporting the learning of these students who come to the company to continue their learning. So the goal of this tool is to support both VET institutions, but also companies in making the most of digital technologies for the training. The idea is to collect what's going on in the work-based learning environment, but also in the school-based learning environment in relation to the use of digital technologies, to reflect about what we are doing, to identify strong areas, weak areas, and to move ahead with the digitalization of this process. This tool was launched like 2 years, 1 year and a half approximately in October 2021, and it is an extension of SELFIE to these requirements, to the requirements of work-based. So as I mentioned before, the major novelty of SELFIE WBL is that we bring companies into the self-reflection process, because we also are involving the learning that is taking place at the company context. It's very important because in the previously we only have the feedback from the school context, but we don't have any information from the company context. So in this way, we are creating like a forum or a link between the company and the vet institution. That's how they can discuss, reflect about the use they are doing of digital technologies, and to improve, try to identify weak areas or connection between the school context and the company context. So the idea is to bring both worlds into the same exercise, because vet is a natural bridge between the educational and world and the labor market. So here it's important that both worlds work together to reflect about the use they are doing of digital technologies for learning, and try to collaborate and to design a common path, to have a better prepared workforce, which is the main goal in the future. So very important. We first started with a feasibility study. Then, with these positive results, we start with the proper development of the tool. Once we have the first version of the tool, we did an extensive piloting of the tool in 9 countries with the collaboration of the European Tech Foundation and the European Forum of Vocational Education and Training. And based on the result of this piloting, we fine-tuned the tool in order to have a final version, you allow me to say that, for the launch in October last year. It's very important to say also that this tool is supporting different European policies. As I mentioned here, one of them is the European Council recommendation of vocational education and training, which clearly stated that there was a need to support the digital transformation of the vet sector and to use or to generate a tool to support also this process. And also the Osnabrück Declaration. We also mentioned this need of digital transformation for them. So I think that's a key slide here, because we consider that there are 2 different approaches of using SELFIE WBL. One is what we call bottom-up. It's the use directly by the vet institution, because any vet institution can use the tool, they can involve the company, so they reflect together, they get this SELFIE WBL report with the results, showing the areas with a better development, areas with more room for improvement, different opinions, because sometimes it's important to check why, for example, vet teachers are thinking this thing and the students, they don't think the same thing. It's good to contrast these different opinions to identify potential situation there. So the vet institution, they use the tool, they get this report, and based on this report, on this data, they analyze this data, and they can take informed decisions to move ahead in this digital transformation path. That's why a grassroots approach. So it's bottom up. The innovation came or the improvement came directly from the ground.
About 1 more minute, Cesar, please. 1 more minute, then we have to close.
Okay. Yes.
1 more minute.
Yes, and finally, there is another approach, which is the policymakers. We can share aggregated data with the policymakers, so they can get this overall picture of what's going on, and based on that, they can design the policies. And as I'm going to be very quick, now at the moment we are working in research in 3 lines to identify enablers of digital transformation in the sector, how to better involve companies, and also how to link vet provision with professional digital profiles. And before, this is my last slide, because it's worth to explain and to briefly describe a good example of using our resources, our frameworks and tools. In this case, in the regional, it's the Basque Country here in Spain, which is one of the best developed vet systems in Europe. They have a specific institution for research and innovation in vet, which is something incredible. They have a very close relationship with companies, and vet is playing a key role in the region, in the improvement of the region. So what they did is they have developed a regional plan for the digital transformation of education with a digital maturity model for them. And they have used our frameworks and tools. I mentioned that in the slide. They have analyzed, taking what is more relevant and more appropriate for them, and adapted and implemented into the regional context. So that's a very good approach. No, we have the frameworks, the tools. They just take the most relevant things from them and they adapt it into the regional context. And that's all, because I think I'm running out of time. And very happy. This is my email, and if you have questions, happy to answer here or by email. Many thanks.
Thank you, Cesar. Thank you. I know you had a lot of ground to cover there, and a little less time than the other presenters, but we are approaching the end now. Very interesting, again, fascinating to see the engagement of companies and sectors. Just one brief question I think we can fit in. What's quite interesting was when you talked about companies and employers, is that across all different employer sectors? Are there more sectors that are heavily engaged, or how does that work?
Very good question. It's for sure that there are differences among sectors, no? But as a general rule, what should be clear for companies is the benefit. If they feel the benefit in the involvement, they will go directly for it. So maybe more than sector approach is to have a clear benefit for them, no? Because sometimes they only involved in this kind of activities if they see a clear benefit, no? As a general rule, for sure there are many other conditions, but one of them the first thing to achieve is to establish a clear benefit both for the company but also for the institution.
Thank you, Cesar. Thank you. I think we're going to bring this to a close now. I have a few closing remarks, but Cesar, wonderful presentation. The slides will be available to everyone, and I'm sure, as with Anastasia and as with Jude, if there are things to follow up individually, I'm sure Cesar, as much as he can, could follow up with you all. So again, around the world, please thank Cesar in the conventional fashion by applauding if you're in your own rooms, and do that. So I guess this brings us to the final part of our session today, just some closing remarks. I'd like to thank again all the speakers. I'd like to thank all of you for giving your time up today, particularly those who contributed questions as well. Hope they were answered, and hope that moves your work forward. Also, of course, to thank Kenny, and Sarah, and Max, and all the team at UNEVOC for making this seminar happen. I think what comes from today is a few points, particularly that when we're moving forward, the area of digital competence and supporting development of digital skills, that collaboration is crucial, communication is very important, and it's an evolving area. While we see that the time and investment that's gone in the DigComp suite of frameworks, they're always developing and moving forward. As Jude outlined at the beginning, it's a dilemma in some respects when to update, as many people are using the framework at the moment. Again, as Cesar pointed out at the end as well, engaging different organisations is crucial, particularly employers as well, as they look to offer support across all different kinds of sectors. Just to point out that this isn't the last of our seminars at UNEVOC. Hopefully we're delivering 2 more seminars over the course of the year to, again, allow people to engage and understand more about the Digital Transformation Hub, and it can support you in your work. And we'll hopefully also be advertising those seminars, and please do look out for them. It's been a really excellent discussion and conversation today. We can only really move this work forward by this kind of dialogue. Thank you again for participating. I think we're literally at the end now, and we will send off the information to you. Thank you, wherever you are in the world. If you're in the morning, enjoy the rest of your day. At the end of the day, enjoy the evening. We look forward to seeing you at our future seminars later in the year. Thank you very much.